Hello and welcome back. So I was correct in my prediction at the last video that I am reading The Color Purple. I've already started it some, and I do want to give like a trigger warning. Pretty much any trigger warning that you can imagine will probably apply here. Things of domestic violence, any kind of sexual violence, including rape, assault, child abuse, just adult abuse, like truly any sort of trigger warning that you could think of is probably going to be coming up at some point in this book, but I'll try to give some kind of warning. But to start, I do want to note like a couple of things. So one, up until recently, we've been doing things kind of based on like around a particular author or set of authors. A lot of them have been white European authors. So now that I'm not really doing like a particular author, then I'm wanting to just kind of go through my list of classics that I've been meaning to read and just picking one up and doing a vlog with it, like whichever ones I feel like. I'm not going to do every single one because I read enough classics that it's like it would be exhausting to do a vlog for every single one of them, but some here and there. All to say that there should be some more diverse authors and voices as I continue on with videos, because that's more reflective of what I read and what I want to read. I want to slightly mention just briefly the fact that of just my own ignorance. So I grew up in Georgia. I was born in Georgia. I went through private and public school education in Georgia. I had not heard anything about this book as far as the premise. I knew the name and I knew the author, but I didn't know the premise. I had no idea that she was like the first African American woman to win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I didn't know that history. I didn't even know that this story was set in rural Georgia, at least to start with. I didn't know any of that. And that is partly my fault, of course, so I'll just say self-education is important, but also it is definitely a failing of a broken system that continues to be broken as we continue to perpetuate these rules and restrictions about being woke in school, when really we're just asking for diverse voices and authors and more people at the table, because part of learning and growing is hearing about different experiences and perspectives that aren't your own. That's the beauty of education. So I did want to like slightly go on that soapbox for like 2 seconds before I even begin to talk about the book. But the actual book, a trigger warning for any kind of sexual violence. The opening scene is Celie, our protagonist, being raped by her father. So that's within just the first page. It is a very difficult start, obviously. And then you start to learn more about her life and her dynamic within her family, and some of the hardships that she has. So she does have a main sister named Nettie, which is a lot of people will know if they already know some premise of the story. And it starts off with just the beginnings of Celie and Nettie's relationship, and that Celie kind of feels this protective nature over Nettie, tries to shield her from a lot of difficulties so that way she can continue on her life and shine in the way that Celie feels that she can't really do. And for various reasons. I haven't really speculated into why she limits herself so much, but I would have to assume it has something to do with her past trauma, which is what we start with as the opening of the book. So once that Celie and Nettie are separated, we start to see Celie's relationship with the man who she is married, who as of right now does not have a name. They just call him Mr. He is also an abusive male figure in her life, regularly beats her. She's in charge of the children, but the children don't really respect her because they don't really see her as an authority figure since she doesn't have any sort of power in the situation. She does start to become sort of friends or a confidant of some sort to one of the eldest sons, which is Harpo. And Harpo starts to fall for this girl named Sophia. Okay, so there is a dialect in this book, and I'll do my best, but of course I will probably fail multiple times. So this is Harpo talking to Celie about Sophia, and he says, "She's pretty, he tell me. Bright. Smart?" Celie asking. "Nah, bright skin. She's smart though, I think." So the big part of that is, of course, the fact that Harpo notes that she is light-skinned. And I just kind of marked colorism because I felt, well, I mean, one, that is literally an example of colorism, but also I was kind of like, I wonder if this is going to come up within their dynamic. Okay, so I moved a little bit closer to things because it's a struggle flipping back and forth between pages. But so this is where Harpo was questioning if he should beat Sophia because that's what he's seen his dad do to Celie, aka his like mother figure. She's reflecting, like Celie is reflecting, and says, "I think about how every time I jump, when Mr. call me, She looks surprised, like she pity me. Beat her, I say. So then Harpo does try, and then fails because Sophia fights back. And during this same, like the next scene over, Sophia comes to confront Seeley and says, "You told Harpo to beat me," she said. Skip a couple lines. "I say it because I'm a fool, I say. I say it because I'm jealous of you. I saw it cause you to do what I can't." What that, she say. "Fight," I say. The jealousy that Seeley feels towards Sophia might be more than just the fact that she can fight. It could also just be because people say that she's pretty, and that people say that she's pretty because she's light-skinned. At least that's a really big part of why people say that she's pretty. Seeley is not light-skinned, and we know that through like various different descriptions that she has of herself. So a lot of people do tell her that she's ugly to her face. So I think that there is a lot of like truth in the fact of Seeley saying that you can fight and I can't, or at least you have that in you, or you feel that you have that in you and I don't feel I have that in me. And also this second layer of the beauty standards that white supremacy has set up for all women, but especially Black women, and how that kind of manifests in this underlying jealousy that is more than just the fact that Seeley feels that she can't fight and she can't move around the world the way that Sophia can, which might also have to do with the fact that Sophia is light-skinned. So those are like some of my thoughts. Obviously, I have to keep it a very academic sort of take on things because that's not my experience and I can't really speak to that. So this is very much like all literature is speculation when it comes to your interpretation of things, but like this is especially speculations. That's just kind of where I am right now. And I did some filming while I was on some trips in December and January. So we're gonna go like back in time for a second for some of my little snippets of life. And yeah, I'll check back in once I have more to say about the book. Okay, so I'm about 2/3 of the way through the book at this point. I've had a lot of thoughts, and it's overwhelming to try to like get them all succinct, but I'm gonna do my best. So I also did write them down, so I might occasionally refer to my notes. But one of the reasons why I decided to read this and I put this down in my like to be read pile is because it was recommended to me by a friend, but also she was like, not only is this a great book, but also it's gay. And I'm like, okay, enough said. Now that I've gotten further into it, it is gay. So I'm gonna briefly kind of like talk a little bit about that relationship. So there is a character named Shug Avery, and we do meet her a little bit earlier on, mostly through Celie just saying that like she's a blues singer that she really likes and is obsessed with. But then she does eventually come into Celie's life, and she actually winds up living with Celie for a little bit, and Celie has to help nurse her back to health. Anyways, so their friendship forms first. For Celie, she's always known that she has some kind of sexual attraction to Shug, I think. She hasn't said it in those words per se, but it's more of she's like, I look at her and I feel something down there. And we know what the down there means. She also has a romantic attraction to her too, because like, Shug does wind up like having kind of an affair with Mr., which Celie is like not even so concerned about the whole like, oh, you're the other woman. She's more like, I'm jealous that it's not me and it's him, is more of like the dynamic. Then Shug kind of like tries to teach Celie to, you know, consider sexual pleasure as something to like look forward to in life and to love your body and those kind of things, which is the thing that like Celie hasn't really experienced or thought about, because I mean she's a rape victim, and it's understandable that she does not think of sex as being any kind of pleasure. So Shug is trying to like, as someone who is very like sexually active and free, she does try to like encourage Celie to like, you know, look at your body, notice those parts. And there's a whole scene where she's like talking her through like how to find the clip. I think that like Shug is doing a lot to help Celie heal from her past trauma, and they also do have like, they definitely lend themselves to having a sapphic relationship, not necessarily calling it in those terms or recognizing it maybe in that way, but like, I mean, they do like share a bed together at some point, and from Celie's writing it is very intimate, not necessarily sexual, but just intimate. Of course, a relationship that I'm interested to see how it develops. Another significant thing about Shug is that she brings Celie Nettie's letters, because Mr. has been hiding Nettie's letters this entire time. We're also like reading through Nettie's letters throughout this part of the book, which is very interesting, and I will get to more of that in a minute. But one of the other themes that I find really intriguing about the book is that you can really like do a lot just looking at hair with this book. I don't have those expertise, so I don't think I can really go into it, but like there's these little moments where it's like there's a time where Shug is like getting better after an illness, and she wants to go from cornrows to like a silk press so that she can, when she goes on stage and stuff. And like I think that like Nettie's letters, you can see something really interesting between the way that like Nettie is viewing things and how Celie is viewing things, specifically with their thoughts on Christianity. I am going to read like two passages. One of them is Celie having like a vision, and how she describes God and heaven and the divine. And then another one is Nettie kind of like realizing the pitfalls of like white Christianity, and basically realizing like Jesus is not a white dude, unlike what we've been told our entire lives. So let me grab those two. Okay, so this is Celie. Angels all in white, white hair and white eyes, look like albinos. God all white too, looking like some stout white man work at the bank. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, so this is from one of Nettie's letters, and she says, all the Ethiopians in the Bible were colored. The pictures that they illustrate, the words, you know, looking at like the religious photos or crucifixes and things like that, all of the people are white, and so you just think all the people in the Bible were white too. But really, white people lived somewhere else during those times. That's why the Bible says that Jesus had hair like lamb's wool. Lamb's wool is not straight, Sealy. It isn't even curly. Going back to hair, I do think that, like, Nettie saying that lamb's wool isn't straight or even curly is that I think in this context, curly is still considered like a white trait. So that's why I think that, like, there is that, like, emphasis of, like, no, it's not even like, what you can consider another race or like another European or something. Like, this is like black people. Jesus was a black person. So I thought that, like, that was a very interesting comparison, and their different worldviews, and how, like, because Nettie is having this experience where she is a missionary and she's going to Africa, she's able to, like, see different cultures and different people, including actually, like, England as well, and see how different it is from American culture and the way that they treat black people in American culture in a way that, like, Sealy simply cannot because of the circumstances. But then another thing that I think is interesting, looking more back at, like, Black identity, is Nettie's experience working in an African village. I think I would assume village. It's a particular group, but I don't remember the name and I don't know how to pronounce it, but I will put it somewhere and I will eventually figure out how to pronounce it. Jumping in with a voiceover real quick. The pronunciation for the African tribe is Olinka, which is actually a fictional West African tribe within the context of this novel. I, of course, did a little bit more research after I did the filming of that first video. And I also did want to kind of continue a little bit more in a voiceover format of my thoughts about Black identity within the story, because later on when I was reading, I found a passage that I think really encapsulates what I was trying to say way better than what I can personally say. But I am going to, give a little bit more context here. So I do start to talk about how there is some clashing of the cultures between the African village and Nettie / some of the other Black missionaries. And by the way, one of the missionaries' names is Simon, which will be important when I read the passage. And I just found that was particularly interesting and insightful when it comes to how people may try to shape their identity and some of the difficulties that may come up when you're considering the Black diaspora and the effects that can have on not only yourself but also how you might relate to a community. So I'm going to go ahead and read the quote, but just so you know, this quote comes like much later. So this is Nettie speaking. She says, "The Africans never asked us to come, There is no use blaming them if we feel unwelcome. It's worse than unwelcome," said Samuel. Sorry, his name's Samuel, not Simon. Oops. Anyways, "It's worse than unwelcome," said Samuel. "The Africans don't even see us. They don't even recognize us as the brothers and sisters they sold." So that's just a small passage that, again, I just feel probably does a little bit better with giving both the perspective and the context that I was trying to explain very poorly. But just again, like, overall, I think that there's a lot of different directions that you can go with grappling with identity in this novel. I think another example would be actually a biracial character who struggles with, finding her place because she's rejected by white society, but then also she doesn't really feel like she could take much of a stance in the Black community because she doesn't feel like she fully belongs because she's not fully Black. So there's just like a lot of different things that you can do with racial identity and gender identity. But those are just, a couple of the thoughts that I had for this particular part of the book. And I look forward to finishing it up. I'm very excited. I'm at this point of my recording, I'm like maybe 40 pages away. So I will be coming with final thoughts very soon. so I have finished The Color Purple. It was extremely good. It was 4.5 stars for me. That's pretty keeping though with my reading style. I tend to really enjoy modern classics a lot, like anything from the 1920s through I guess the 1980s. I tend to rank pretty high. I just connect, I think, with that time period. I don't know if it's because like the language is easier for me to read, or like the themes sometimes feel more relevant or easier to connect with. I don't really know, but that does tend to be a thing for me. So it's not a surprise that this book ranks very, very high on my list. I do want to kind of like touch on maybe one more plot point and do one more little passage reading before I give my full final thoughts, because the later half or the later third of this book is very different than most of the other part of the book, because there is like a major turning point. There's also a ton of plot twists in the very end. It's really good, and I don't want to give a lot of spoilers with that, so I'm not really going to go into too many details. But one thing that is such a great passage is when Celie stands up to Mister. And up until this moment, she's been very like quiet and not ever really confronting anything with him. And when he says jump, she goes, which is like a paraphrasing of what she actually says and describes her relationship with him. And she is sitting there with dinner with him, Shug, Harpo, Sophia, and then I think maybe a couple other people. And that's when she just stands her ground, and it's so great. So I'm going to read that. Okay, so basically Shug tells Mister that she and Celia are going to Memphis together, and he says, over my dead body. You satisfied that what you want, Shug said. Mister started up from his seat, looked at Shug, plopped back down again. He looked over at me. I thought, you finally happy, he says. What's wrong now? You a low-down dog is what's wrong, I said. It's time to leave you and enter into the creation, and your dead body, just the welcome mat I need. Say what? He asked, shocked. All around the table, folks' mouths be dropping open. You took my sister Nettie away from me, I say, and she was the only person loved me in the world. Mister started to sputter, but sound like some kind of motor. But Nettie and my children coming home soon, I say, and when she do, and all of us together are gonna whip your ass. Nettie and your children, say Mister, you talking crazy. I got children, I say, being brought up in Africa. Good schools, lots of fresh air and exercise, turning out a heap better than the fools you didn't even try to raise. Hold on, say Harpo. Oh, hold on hell, I say. If you hadn't tried to rule over Sophia, the white folks never would have caught her. Sophia's so surprised to hear me speak up, she ain't chewed for 10 minutes. There probably was a couple things here and there that maybe needs more context. The main one that I'm just going to go over is the fact that the opening scene with Celie being raped by Pa, the children that she gives birth to don't necessarily stay in the house and the family. They actually are given to missionaries, which winds up being the missionaries that Nettie travels with. So that's how like there's that whole connection. But the thing that I really love about this scene is that you can tell that Celie stands her ground, yes, for herself, but she also does it with the aid and like motivation of knowing that Shug, Sophia, and Nettie are like all in her corner. And since I love, analyzing female friendships, I think that's so beautiful. And I love that we're presenting female friendships that way, because sometimes it's not always a beautiful thing. And sometimes novels and narratives tend to focus on more of like the struggles and the gruesome parts. But I really love how you can tell that it's clearly just they all love and support each other. So anyways, that was just such a great passage, because it was so cathartic to read after seeing like the struggles that Celie's faced, especially in the hands of men and especially in the hands of Mister. So that was so great. But overall, there are so many themes that I noticed throughout this novel that I haven't even brought up in this section or in any of my talking reflections, because there's just too much for me to even go through. So I do have like a reading journal that I've been trying to use to be more just reflective in the books that I'm reading in general. So I did like a whole like mind map for this book, and I'm just gonna like show it and maybe just read through some of the different points. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's kind of crazy and all over the place, but we've talked about Black identity some, we've talked about gender performance. Talk a little bit about colorism. I mentioned that like hair and music seem to be like symbols of identity connection, and colorism shown through Harpo and what he believes is like beautiful or worthy of being his wife. And then you have the communal family structure versus the white nuclear families that you kind of sort of see a little bit in the book. And then you have colonialism, and there is a whole scene with the African tribe having to grapple with a rubber plant or a rubber plantation coming into their territory, their lands. So I also kind of marked that sort of like, to a degree, mirrors some neocolonialism that happened in the 80s and definitely still some today. And in colonialism, I have like black diaspora and the slave trade and whitewashing Christianity. And then within gender performance, I have like Shug and Seeley's sapphic relationship, and there being a lot of overlapping of love interests throughout the novel, slash kind of sort of polyamory, but also kind of not. The patriarchy and violence against women shown with Mr. beating Seeley, Pa raping Seeley, Harpo trying to beat Sophia, and the fact that the violence against women tends to fade as the male characters find other avenues to connect with their maleness or masculinity. And then I also just note that like Sophia is someone who doesn't really play by a lot of the gender roles. So that's just like, I mean, again, tipping of the iceberg for sure. There really is just so much that you could do with this book and analyze that I just want to note how little I've even really touched on. The only other thing is just like, I did try to consider, why did Alice Walker write this in the 80s? And this is very speculation, but I kind of feel like that there is sort of a parallel between the time that this book is set in, which is roughly the early 1900s and the 1980s, of there being two really big historical events in African American history and being like a few years removed from that historical event, and how that kind of impacts both like the Black community and Black identity, but then also just like the greater society that you exist in. So like, for example, of course the early 1900s is like 50-ish years removed from emancipation, and then the 80s is like less than 20 years removed from the civil rights movement. And I think what this novel kind of shows, as far as like narratively, is that even after those big policy or power structures change within like in the laws of the books, it doesn't necessarily always change in society. If anything, it tends to morph itself into something else. It's like, no, you're not having to deal with slavery anymore, but that doesn't mean that all the hardships are gone. And it's like, no, you're not having to deal with Jim Crow laws, but that doesn't mean that the hardships are gone. It's like, we didn't cure racism in any of these moments. It's like, we won battles, but we didn't win the war. And I think there's like this notion, both probably in the 80s and definitely still today, that because we won these battles, then all of a sudden racism is not a thing and you don't have any problems, we've solved it, it's over. It's like, no, like, we've made milestones, but there's still more to go. Jumping in with another quick voiceover here. So I realized that at no point in my final thoughts that I mentioned the fact that I think probably a big reason for why Alice Walker wrote The Color Purple in the way that she did was also the gay liberation movement. The novel was published in the early 80s, I want to say 1982, but I could be wrong on that. And the gay liberation movement became a lot more mainstream by the 70s, although like you can definitely track it way before that. But of course, like into the 80s, then it was taken over by the AIDS crisis. So like, I don't necessarily know how much of the AIDS crisis really factored into her narrative. But I do think that at least like the general gay liberation movement that was happening around this time definitely had a lot of motivation for her to write a Black lesbian centered story. So, did want to briefly note that. But yeah, I'll take it back to other me now. All to say, The Color Purple was a fantastic novel. It deserves all of the awards that it has won, and most likely more, to be honest. And it is a relatively accessible read when it comes to classics. I mean, there is like a dialect, like I said at one point, but it's one where you can still like comprehend what's going on. It's not like some of the other dialects that I've read in like Wuthering Heights or something. So I highly recommend this classic for sure. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got, and we'll see what book I wind up doing next time. Bye.